Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. This is the Ideas Book Talk series, and this is the third book that we are showcasing here today. And as you know, this is a quarterly event that we have at Ideas, and we hope to continue to have it. तो अगर आप में से कोई किताब कोई नई अगर पब्लिश हुई है एनी स्कॉलरशिप इन पाकिस्तान और आप रेकमेंड करना चाहें तो प्लीज़ हमें ज़रूर रेकमेंड कीजिएगा. Today please join me in welcoming our speaker, who is Ayaz Khan Achakzai, who is a public policy expert and development economics practitioner. His work in international development includes stints at the World Bank, United Nations, private consulting, and non-profit organizations. He was educated at Colby College, Oxford University, and Princeton University. And the reason why he is our guest speaker today is because he is the co-translator and editor of the book that is going to be under discussion today, which is My Life in Times, an autobiography of Abdul Samad Khan Achakzai. And so Ayaz here has co-translated this book and very meticulously edited it as well. And the other co-translator, or I should say the primary translator of this book from Pashto is Muhammad Khan Achakzai, who is the ex-governor of Balochistan and Ayaz's father. Am I right?
My claim to fame.
Yes. So, My Life and Times is an autobiography of legendary Pashtun nationalist leader Abdul Samad Khan Achakzai, 1907 to 1973. He is also known as Khan Shaheed, and may I also add that another name, which is popular name, which is used for him, is Balochistan's Gandhi. So here is a huge ideological influence on his own thinking and practice and politics. Abdul Samad Khan Achakzai wrote the bulk of his autobiography while he was in prison during the Ayub Khan regime from 1958 to 1968. It is a very candid first-person account of his life, and it's not just a political memoir. So it's a very interesting personal trajectory that he takes us through in this memoir from, actually from before his birth, gives a lot of political context. And then, of course, through his childhood, his youth, and then eventually, his politics. So because the memoir is written during the Ayub decade, his own, I think, narrative stops at 1968-69, which is when he's released from prison after a pretty long term that we'll talk about. And then in December of 1973, I believe he is assassinated. So those 5 years are really not covered in the first-person narrative, but I think that in the translation, you and your father have taken pains at giving a bit of context to what happens in those 5 years of his life. So I will not say much more except that, I would like you, Ayaz, to perhaps begin first with an introduction of yourself, because surely this is a very imperfect introduction.
I think that's
say a bit more, and also, say a bit more perhaps about the book itself, the fact that it's written in Pashto, and perhaps share some other details around that. And it would be wonderful if you could also share at the very beginning some context to the translation and the editorial work, how long it took you and your father, the process of actually translating such a huge piece of work and remaining true to it, but also, trying to ensure that the audience that it's written for actually is able to engage with it. So ye Angrezi mein translation hai, and maybe say a bit more about who the intended audience for this translation is. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you to Ideas and to Maryam for inviting me and giving me the chance to speak about this book, which I feel like is very important because not much work has been done on Samad Khan Achakzai. So if you go through the archives or if you go through books, you don't see any material that specifically focuses like upon him. Like as you mentioned, he wrote the book from 1958 to 1968 when he was a prisoner during the like Ayub Khan's martial law time. And he writes in the memoirs as well, like if he were a free man, because he's so busy that he wakes up early, he says his prayers, and then he starts to meet people, and he has other social engagements. That if he had been a free man, he would have probably never gotten around to writing this book. And in prison, he also gives his like he writes at one point that I woke up at this time, and then I read these many newspapers, and then I read these books, and now it's only noon, and so like I will write my biography. So my father, so if you look at the manuscript, it really looks like some like ancient piece of writing that has been dug up from somewhere because there was writing on every single centimeter of the page. And I think this was because in prison, paper and pen were scarce. So you can see like a jumble and someone really trying to conserve space and probably even ink. So my father started the translation in 2001, and he sort of had a first draft done by around 2007. My like involvement, and he wanted to have it done for the centenary of like Khan Shaheed's birth. My contribution at that point was just as a typist. So he would dictate to me, and I would type. And as Maryam mentioned, it can be a frustrating sort of procedure as well, because if you're looking for that one word or that one phrase that really fits, and you can't. So my contribution was just limited to that. So after 2008, because the manuscript still needed some work, it was given to a few people. But the problem was that to do a good job, you needed proficiency in Pashto, you needed proficiency in English, but then you also needed proficiency in the script that he had used to write. So because he was a newspaper publisher, he had seen that Pashto was hard to publish because it had many redundant like alphabets. So sounds that a village Pashtun or a local Pashtun would not. So for example, Dwad or Ain or Zoin, which even I think in Pakistan, if you speak Urdu, you don't really use them. So he said, okay, we need to come into the modern age, and we also need to make Pashto easy to learn. Because in Pashto, for example, if you say lam, waw, re, lur and lor. So lur can be daughter, lor can be it's like a like implement to do farming. So if you're learning it and you just see that, you can't really tell ke ye word kya hai. So he came up with this new script which made sense to me. But I think like other scholars or people who were used to the old script, they had a hard time in sort of reading it and being able to decipher it. So in 2019, the manuscript fell to me, and basically kaha gaya ke ye lo aur karo. So I was like, okay. And then COVID happened, so I had time on my hands. And as I worked through it, I felt that it also required references, because there are a lot of terms, there are a lot of people mentioned, and I wanted to make sure that were these people really there, who was this person. So I put in some time and I tried to give the context. So any place that's mentioned, any plant, any like the cultural thing, any like official, I've tried to reference like all of them. So and yeah, so then we got it published around 2022.
So 2001 में आपने आपके फादर ने ये प्रोसेस शुरू किया ट्रांसलेशन का, और 2022 में आप कह रहे हैं कि
जी, तो काफी it's a like embarrassingly long time.
No, 2 decades.
2 decades, yeah.
I mean, so a lot of work has gone into it, and probably a lot of drafts have gone into
Yes,
the making of
so
this book?
my computer is full of drafts, and I had to. So now I really have much more respect for people who write books and come up, because I firsthand saw the effort that goes into it. So I had to learn a sort of labeling system pretty quickly, because my computer started to have multiple drafts. So yeah, you can sort of chart the course of the book like over the years.
That's very interesting. And थोड़ा सा बताएं कि how does oral tradition intersect with this translation? So growing up, you yourself, were you familiar with a lot of these stories? Had they come down to you from your father and other relatives? Did that make it easier for you to read through, understand, translate, or was this your first, in a sense, interaction with your grandfather, so to say?
I can easily pick the latter. So I feel like through this work, I got to know my grandfather.
Okay.
Prior to this, all you would hear of that he's a great man, or he spent many years in prison, or you would just hear of like anecdotes. But to really sort of know who he was, I think the manuscript sort of gave me a window into the person. As far as oral history is concerned, so in the introduction that I wrote, and in the foreword, I tried to put in as many like instances that people had known about, like into it. And then towards the end of the book, you have his visit to Afghanistan and to Kabul. So that's not properly labeled, but that's my uncle, Dr. Hamid, who was with him. So that's through his recollections. The rest is all what he wrote in the memoir. And then, as you said, at the end, we've tacked on sort of his like statements to the court, his views on the 1971 Constitution, his letters to Liaquat Ali Khan and Jinnah Saab and Wali Khan and Ajmal Saab. So yeah, we try to just give as much context like as we could.
ठीक है, सही है. And can you say something about how the original manuscript was preserved and who preserved it?
I think, luckily enough, it was somewhere in the house, and
It was somewhere in the house.
somewhere in the house. It's a sheaf of papers, and the handwriting is not that great. But one thing that really struck me when I was going through the manuscript was that, so this person, you have to realize, he's in prison for 10 years, and he is writing this in his jail cell without like access to Google or to a library or to any reference material. And so I was expecting mistakes to happen, like maybe he mentioned some event in some year or something else, or maybe the political agent that he thought was at this event was probably somebody else. But remarkably, I mean, to his like kudos to him, every single instance it sort of checked out. Apart from one, right at the beginning in the 30s, when they are incarcerated in the police lines, he mentions that all the police were in there because it was some sort of a religious holiday. And he mentioned that, oh, I think it might have been this, but it wasn't that. But apart from that, it was remarkably accurate.
So you've gone through the process also of corroborating names, dates, events.
Yep. So it's because when I got the manuscript, when I read through it, I said, okay, if you know Balochistan or if you know Pakistan, then things might make sense. But if you are to the outside, and I think I missed your question about the audience. So the audience is Pakistan and the world as well. People who might not read Pashto or who might not read Urdu but might read English. So I don't know if there are any budding researchers here to get interest. This is a like area where a lot more work can be done to sort of spark that interest here.
Because so of course I've read the book from start to finish, and I can tell you that एक बहुत meticulous detail है, और for somebody who's in prison for that long, for him to sustain his interest in noting down these things almost on a daily basis. He is reminiscing about the past, and it's very interesting because the narrative tends at times to move back and forth.
Yep.
It's because he's trying to make sense of his own life. He is a very, very introspective individual from what I can see. He's always questioning, you know, his own ideas, and he's always very forthright. So he says, you know, I used to do things this way, and then I saw this happening, and then I thought about it and I changed my mind. So a very, very progressive, introspective person, which is why this becomes really important for students of politics and history as well, because like you've also mentioned in the introduction, it's not just, you know, memoir, or it's not just a political autobiography. It's somewhere in the middle, because you know, here is a person who is showing you, demonstrating to you how he's evolving politically, socially and politically. And because of that, kitab mein there are multiple references of the historical and political backdrop to what is happening in his personal life. And that's why reading this book was a huge historical revelation for me, at least, because, you know, I enjoy history and this is an area that I'm also looking at, other aspects of course. But इसके अंदर जो तफसील से बयान किया गया है British Balochistan की history, right? And how watching that history actually in politics unfold in front of his eyes, how that is making a huge impact on his own political ideology. अब उस political ideology को आप उनकी जो है ना personal life or personal evolution से अलहदा नहीं कर सकते. So here is a person who's so deeply involved in the politics of his, where he is, his region, and that's, you know, just adding to his political evolution. So it's a great lens to use for political history as well. So I think for the benefit of our audience, and I don't mean to be presumptuous, लेकिन मेरे ख्याल से we can all benefit from starting with the political backdrop and then coming to his personal life and his trajectory. So in terms of the political backdrop, if you could say, you know, a few words about, I see you've got some great visuals here. What is the background to British Balochistan? I know that this is an entity which is formed in the late 19th century.
Yep.
And here is a person who is born in 1907. So he's right in the midst of, you know, the birth of British Balochistan, and his own life is so enmeshed with that, with the creation of that new form of colonial governance. Because, you know, you hear so many terms, the Sandeman system, the frontier crimes regulation, the tribal levies, you've probably heard of political agents. And you can imagine कि ये एक ऐसा वक्त है जब you know, the people, the natives who are living there are grappling with very fast moving changes, and what they would also refer to as a corruption of traditional modes of their own existence, of what they refer to as jirga justice, right? And the Sardari system. So maybe we can start with that and move ahead.
Sure. So, like, should I start with British Balochistan?
Sure.
Or?
Ji, bilkul.
So this is a bit of a complication. So I know when you hear of Balochistan now, you would think of this whole the yellow plus the red. But till the late 19th century, the yellow was a princely state, sort of it used to be called the Kalat States Union, and the red was part of Afghanistan. So this area was transferred to British India after the second Anglo-Afghan War in the 1880s. So the usual colonial practice was that when a colonizing power would take over part of a state, they would name it after them. So, for example, you have British Somaliland, Belgian Congo, French Guyana, French Morocco. यहाँ पे ये हुआ कि they could have named it British Afghanistan or British Pashtunistan, but for some reason they named it British Balochistan, even though the 95% of this population is Pashtun. So this becomes a chief commissioner's province in the 1890s. And just to give you some context, what we call KP now and what used to be the like NWFP, it used to be part of Punjab then. So KP only became, or the like NWFP only became a chief commissioner's province in 1901. And Sindh, I think, was carved out of Bombay even much after, maybe in the 1930s. So in Pakistan, in the Pakistan studies courses, when you read Jinnah's 14 points, and he says that Balochistan should be made a province, he's not referring to all of this Balochistan, jo like abhi hai, he was referring to British Balochistan. And it's really strange because like NWFP becomes a complete province in 1932 or 31. Sindh, when it's carved out of Bombay, that also becomes a complete province. But British Balochistan remains the same even after Pakistan comes into being. So Pakistan has come into being, these two like entities. So you have the Kalat States Union, which is primarily Brahwi and Baloch in population, and then you have British Balochistan, which is primarily Pashtun. So they like exist. In 1955, you get the one unit scheme, and even there, they're not merged. So British Balochistan becomes the Quetta division, and the Kalat States Union becomes the Kalat division. So when one unit finally breaks in 1970, at that time, most of the left was part of the National Awaami Party of Pakistan, and it was part of their manifesto, okay, we want to have linguistic provinces made. And in the book, Khan Shaheed also says he's written letters to Wali Khan and to Ajmal Khattak that, look, I've gone and spoken to President Yahya, and he agrees. Okay, he says, okay, if you want this, we'll merge British Balochistan into the rest of the like NWFP and create one single Pashtun province, the one that you can see in green. But like I said, nahi, for some reason, and again, this is a great like avenue for research, this does not come about. And instead, so at this time, the Baloch are really like in a quandary because their population is really small. And they know that they're not going to get a province of their own. So like unke lihaz se, they're prepared that, okay, we are either going to be merged in the Pashtun province or we are going to be merged in Sindh. But as luck would have it, they create this province of Balochistan, and one of Samad Khan's primary aims or the political aims was to like either make this Pashtun part a province like on its own or have one Pashtun province in the country. So I think I've jumped way ahead.
No, I mean, I think that's really important to kind of trace the whole sort of the political demands that come along with how these borders are shifting, right, in some ways. So a couple of things I think which are really important, I think which really impact Khan Shaheed's thinking and his strategizing. One of them is, the Pashtun-Baloch divide. Both within British Balochistan, as you've said, there are some Baloch tribal areas within British Balochistan, but then, when there is talk of a larger Balochistan province, and we'll come to that later on, there is that divide, and it continues till today, right?
Yes, so, but like interestingly, pre-partition, this divide is not there. So pre-partition, everyone in the Kalat state is not part of like British India, so they're not involved in the politics at all. So it's only British Balochistan where you have some sort of political activity going on, and the Baloch presence there was really small. So it's primarily the Murri and the Bukti tribal areas, and this bit of Chaghi, which the population is really low.
Right.
So pre-partition, they don't have a linguistic sort of a nationalism going. They have a geographic nationalism going. Okay, we are all Balochistanis, and the first all like India Baloch conference that happens, I believe, in Jacobabad in 1932. Khan Shaheed is the president of the conference, and he tells them, "Okay, I'm not a Baloch, so I can't really be." But they said, "Okay, we'll changed the name like either that time or like afterwards to All Balochistani sort of a conference. And one of his great friends and colleagues was Yusuf Ali Khan Maksi, who was also very progressive like in his views. So you see all these like actors working in concert, but then like after partition, things change, and that's when you have sort of a split coming about. And I think I won't call it like acrimonious, but say when after like Ayub Khan's fall, when a roundtable conference is called by Yahya Khan to sort of all the parties are there to talk about what to do with the country. Uh, he's in prison, and NAP, his own party, does not call for his release. It's only General Akbar Khan who sort of puts his foot down. Like unless he's part of this, I'm not going to be here. So you can tell the rift had. So it's a pre and post sort of a partition thing.
Very interesting. And then there is, of course, a larger partition on this side and a division, if you will, that has happened pre-partition as well. And you, like you say, this area is actually carved out of, you know, that was inhabited by the Afghans, right? And so there is also this geographical division of Pashtun inhabited land. So now they have been compartmentalized into an entity called British Balochistan, and then you have Pashtuns across that border as well, in Afghanistan, across the Durand line. And however, that doesn't mean that personal relations
not at all
across this border snap, right? So they're enduring social and familial relations. That's something I feel that sitting in Punjab is very difficult for us to grasp, right? Why are these populations moving across this border? ये border porous क्यों है? वो वहाँ क्यों? वो for instance बाचा खान जो है वो काबुल में क्यों है? या फलाना leader जो है वो why are they in Afghanistan? What is happening? And immediately, the suspicion is anti-state activity. I mean, we've seen this in our own lives, in our own times. But can you say a bit more about what those cross-border relations look like, in terms of family associations, linguistic affiliations, political alliances, so on and so forth, because your own grandfather's family was from Kandahar, if I'm not wrong. So if you could say a bit more about, how that rupture comes about and how then it manifests in their life after, this division has been created.
Sure. So I think you make this point really well. So our family, and I give a reference from the archives as well, from the military intelligence files of the British from the Second Anglo-Afghan War. So they say that this family has been like intimately involved with the Afghan court since the formation of that state in 1747. So first, like Anglo-Afghan War, you had like Abdul Khan Achakzai, who basically goes and murders Sir Alexander burns his house down, and sort of sparks that whole war. In the second like Anglo-Afghan War, Khan Shaheed's maternal grandfather is the chief of staff of like Ayub Khan, who defeats the British at Maiwand, and again in the third as well. But so after the second Anglo-Afghan War, the British supported Amir Abdul Rahman to the throne, and our family had sort of been with Ayub Khan. So the family moved to where we are now. This is in the 1890s, and this is before the Durand Line was made. So for us, the family was moving to like an outhouse that had been there for long, but was never really, because they were like involved with like affairs of state. So like you said, even at that time, the border was porous, and people didn't even think of it like as a border. So for example, our own tribe, like Achakzai, they spend the summer in the mountains of what is now Pakistan, but in the winters they used to go down into the plains of what is now like Afghanistan. So this cross-border movement was there, and it's also very normal in the world. If you go to the northern areas, people from Hunza, they can cross over and they can grow up till I think to Kashgar on like an ID card or something like that, and you have these like arrangements like all over. So that I think is hard to understand from the Punjab, because partition in Punjab was of a very different nature. You had violence, and then you also had the divide in terms of beliefs, Muslim versus Sikh, Muslim versus Hindu. वो यहाँ पे नहीं था, and like as we speak now, there is a large protest in Chaman. Like right now, there may be 100,000 people who've been having a like a protest there for maybe 3 to 4 months now. And उनकी demand यही है कि we need to be able to come and go without a passport, because for some of them, for example, they may live in Pakistan, but their graveyard is in like Afghanistan, maybe like a few hundred feet. So how can you go? So at that time, the border was very porous. These problems were not there like at all. But since you mentioned it, so Khan Shaheed, when he thinks about going to Kandahar, he actually applies for a passport. So he says, okay, I'm going, I'm a law-abiding person, I'm going to apply for a passport. So he goes to Pshin to apply for a passport, and this notion that the bureaucracy or the state was very clean or like efficient when the British were here is sort of blown to bits, because like everybody is asking him for a bribe. And at some point he just gives up. He's like, okay, man, I just won't go. So, yeah.
Very interesting. So, Khan Shaheed grows up in a very, very diverse context at that time, right? Because, I mean, he's born himself in Quetta, Pishin, and his family at that time is multilingual. So they speak, I mean, his father, I believe, speaks Arabic, Persian, and Pashto.
Yep.
And lifestyle, as we've said, is influenced by Kandahar, so it's very different from other locals in the same region. And somehow growing up, he develops a real passion for Pashto.
Yep.
And I believe that Arabic and Persian is now lost to you, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you say a little bit about his progressive social and religious outlook? Because the way he describes it, you know, he's anti-Sardari, he's anti-slavery at that time, you know. There is some kind of slave trade going on with the Hazaras, if I'm not wrong. When it comes to women, he is also very vocal about, you know, he's anti-dowry, and so on and so forth. And he actually talks, there are instances where he's also verbalizing how he should interact with more liberal women later on, you know, when he's joined politics and all. And these are things that he's consciously thinking about, okay, you know, how do I remain respectful within this particular domain without being condescending, and then also sharing that with his wife, which is a wonderful anecdote he shares. So say a little bit about his progressive outlook and how that perhaps has also shaped your family's outlook.
So you'll have to guide me a bit here, because you've mentioned a few. I'll start with the respect towards females. So he dedicated the book to his wife, which is very unusual for that time. You must remember, like it was a time when, for example, if you would write your wife's name or your mother's name on a form, the people around you would turn their heads away because they didn't want to read or anything like that. And then he also spends 2 years with his wife in Quetta in a TB sanatorium, which is also, I mean, he took pains to sort of take her there and spend like 2 years there. And if you look at the pictures, when he goes to visit Kabul, his daughter is there with him, and you can see her face, and she's uncovered. That again, when I saw that, I felt that that was revolutionary for like its times. He was a mullah by training, and he starts to get into trouble with other mullahs when he starts to vocalize, when he starts to question in the 1930s. So At some point, there is a very learned, high-profile mullah who comes all the way from Kandahar, which is very far away. He comes all the way, spends one night, leaves the next day, and the only question he has to Khan Shaheed is that, I've heard that you have lost your faith. So because he's questioning these things, so at that time where you don't have any cell phones, you don't have any computers, word has spread so far, okay, look, in this village, there is a former student of yours who now has lost his faith. Coming back to the progressive aspects, if you look at towards, he gives some comments on the constitution. And he says that Pakistan, like all other Muslims, I also want an Islamic constitution, but it's not the Islamic constitution which the mullahs or the people have in mind right now. Putting in a truly Islamic constitution is very hard and beyond our means, like at this point. And he gives a few examples. So he says, if you want to truly, if you want to have like Islamic jurisprudence in place, like every man has to be fed and all of his affairs have to be taken care of by the state. And if that is not done, and if he commits a crime, you can't punish him. So if someone is poor and he can't afford food and he goes and steals, you can't really punish him because like as a state, that's your job. And then this might irk the mullahs even more now, but he says that for a husband, it is like incumbent upon him to find someone to do his wife's like household chores or do them himself. So either you do it, because she is not your servant. He uses this phrase, okay, she is not your servant. When you get married, you make sure that you either find her help or you do that work yourself. And if you can't, then she has the right to go and even ask for separation or divorce. Which is, I mean, if you tell somebody, when I was reading this book, our household help had gone at that time, and I told my dad, if my mom says, there's no help in the house, I'm not going to do this, so ab kya karenge. So these are very progressive views for the time, and this is one reason why the mullahs or the clerics like of that time, they don't sort of look at him like in a good light, and they're always trying to paint him as, oh, he's the Gandhi's follower, oh, he's a Hindu, and this has continued. So one of like a student like in the audience, he told me that when my uncle, this is in the 70s or the 80s, went to visit an area and he prayed like in a mosque, the next day the mullah, he washed the whole mosque. कि ये तो कोई communist या कोई इस तरह के लोग आए हैं, so that had that was there. But you had mentioned a few things.
No, but that's I think you've covered quite a bit. But we can other things can come up in conversation. So I was going to move on to one very important fact about his life, along with I think Abdul Khan as well. Long and multiple periods of incarceration. ठीक है जी. And not just that, as Ayaz will also elaborate, this is just very arbitrary sort of, imprisonment. So there are no, like he's not really charged for any offenses per se. But interestingly, as he's chronicling his times in jail, and I think his first jail sentence is pre-partition. It's actually a jirga sentence in 1930. And उस वक्त नया I think Balochistan में much, is that how you pronounce it? Much jail उस वक्त 1930 or 31 में बना. So at that time, during his imprisonment, he was shifted there, and that seems to be a very, very formative political, time of his life. And he says, jail is the one place that offered me the opportunity of meeting and knowing the people of the entire Balochistan. So this is where his political schooling is really happening, and he's jailed as a very young person at that time. Then again, he, as you know, is incarcerated in 1948. He's Pakistan's first political prisoner. In 1948, he's in Haripur jail for about 6 years. then intermittently between 54 and 58, and then फिर Ayub regime के ज़माने में 58 to 68, the entire decade. So do you want to say something about, you know, his time in prison and how it impacts his family?
So I'll start from the end. So this is not part of the book, but this is we were told by our like elders ke the Ayub Khan regime like offered him ke if you sign this thing ke you won't take part in any future politics, we'll let you go in 2 years. So he didn't even take up that offer, but he also turned the question like around ke if you are willing to let me go, it means that I'm not in the wrong, and you guys have messed up, so you should sort of come clean and tell me, like what's going on, what's like happening here. Like you mentioned, he was never sentenced by a court of law, never. So it's either like by the executive or by a martial law court, which is or by a sort of a jirga. And one reason why I think people should read the book, one of many reasons is, so this person, he spent most of his time in great hardship, but the commitment to his cause was such that when he is freed from prison in 1968, he goes to Quetta, starts his politics like immediately. So there's no rest. There's no like, okay, I'm gonna sort of try and recuperate for a week or a month or 6 months. He goes, he starts from where he had left out, and he is then sentenced to 14 more years. And he willingly accepts it. He's like, okay. So when I read that fact, it really sort of like shocked me, because 10 years in prison and then like starting off like right back at it was, so it showed the belief like in his cause. And I think the book is also, so it's like it's a memoir, it's also a primary historical document, but I feel like he's also speaking to the audience in the sense of like education, like a political manifesto or even sort of a playbook. Because when he's in Much, so prison then is not like prison now. So all the prisoners are kept in shackles, I think, all the time. So basically you had a shackle where they tied up your arms, your hands, and then you had a rod which went down to your feet, and you were in that sort of 24 hours. So you even slept in that, you like ate in that, and you didn't have clothes to wear, you were given sort of a gunny bag. So at some point he mentions that I'm writing all of this not because I want to tell people how hard my stint was. I want to educate the political prisoners of tomorrow that people before you have had it much harder. So when you are coming up now and you feel like, oh, like prison is hard, or how are we going to sort of go through this phase, just remember how it was like in the past. So this sort of like education. The effect on the family is, so I remember Ghani Khan was interviewed by PTV once, I think it was him, and they asked him what kind of a father was Bacha Khan. And he didn't even blink an eye. He said he was a terrible father, terrible father. And the question is like, why? He said because he was never around. And when I speak to my uncles or my dad, so they are coming of age after Pakistan is made, and that's the time where he is in prison. So one of my uncles, he said he met him for the first time when he was 8 or 9 years old. I think my dad spent more time than anyone else because he was in Lahore and he was pursuing his education. So he would visit him in prison. So that was the most. And I mean, obviously, if your father is not there, it has a pretty. I've never heard my uncles or my dad complain, but you can tell. So, for example, when I told you when I don't think I've mentioned this before but so when I was doing the typing for my dad in the first sort of a manuscript, I had a younger cousin, and he was also like helping out. So like we would take shifts and take turns. So because it was really frustrating work, and my dad also had a temper, he was an old man then as well. So then things would stop when we'd be like, okay, we need to take a break now and maybe start tomorrow or something else. So my cousin one day he tells me, "Okay, do you see the pattern?" I'm like, "What?" Like, it's just dad, moods, like he's getting tired or something. And then he look at it. Whenever his like imprisonment is mentioned, and when you're doing those sort of passages, that's when he sort of, you can tell, okay, your father is getting either like not angry, but sort of like the like emotions are coming up, and sort of they're coming out in sort of like an anger or like agitation. So I hadn't noticed it till then, but then when I saw this, I was like, oh, okay. So I mean, clearly the effect is there if you've never seen your father, and yeah.
Interesting. And so, and then we move on. And as you say, he leaves prison and then he kind of immediately goes back into politics, and that happens every time. So here is a person who is deeply committed. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And so, in terms of ideological influences, I think 1930 is a big turning point for him when he's imprisoned through this jirga, when he meets so many people in prison. And then when he's released from that imprisonment, I believe, that is the time of the round table conference of the 1930s. ये pre-partition वाली round table conference है. और यहाँ पे of course all political leaders are engaging with the all India national sort of leadership. And if I can just read out a quote from here, Khan Shaheed says, "My political life started with the decision that evening when I decided with determination to join the freedom movement." So this is a turning point for him. He says he sees that this conference is going to happen. I think he decides with his brother, you look after the family, I look after politics. And that is also the time कि उनकी पहली meeting है with both Gandhi and Abdul Khan, Bacha Khan, in 1931, both of them. And this is the time jab he, in a sense, adopts and then adapts the idea of non-violence to his own political practice. And he says, the foundations of my role in national life were permanently laid during those 15 days that he meets Gandhi and Bacha Khan, and so strong were the foundations that they never moved. Not to be confused with his party later on being, having joined Congress or anything. That's not true, and he explains that. But there's no doubt that ideologically, Gandhi is a towering ideological influence on him versus Jinnah. And that's an interesting anecdote that I leave for you to.
Yeah, so that was a problem. So once Pakistan was made, that was a problem for, there's a book now, Muslims Against the Muslim League. So that was a problem for anyone who was not in the Muslim League. Because the Muslim League was trying to sort of portray itself as one with the state. So the Muslim League is the state and the state is the Muslim League. So if you are against one, then you are against the other. Since this in this book, so British Balochistan and the like NWFP at that time were sort of shielded from the politics of the rest of the subcontinent, because this is like a border area and the British don't want any trouble here. So politics is hard here. And when he starts out, they don't even know, okay, what's going on in the rest of the subcontinent. He starts with a sermon like in a mosque, because that's when he sees, oh, we have so many people gathering, and the police are able to pick up on it within the day, and that's when they call him to prison. So the problem was the rules were much more repressive here than in the rest of India. So they try to reach out. Okay, we need to. So they first try with newspapers. Okay, we need to, and they mention the newspapers in Lahore. Okay, we need to reach out to the newspapers in Lahore and have them talk about us, so that some pressure like is applied like on the British. Okay, they should let sort of some like easement happen here. So they reach out to the Muslim League like initially, and he even writes this like in this book, because they are Muslims, their like initial and natural choice was the Muslim League. But the Muslim League at that point is a loyalist sort of a movement. The Muslim League in British Balochistan is composed of loyalists, sardars, people who are not really moving towards like freedom or not like sort of taking on the British head on. So the Muslim League refuses to like assist them. And then he even mentions that he used to be part of the Muslim conference. So he mentions his like interactions with Sir Muhammad Iqbal. He's a great fan like of his poetry. But then he writes that he parted ways with the Muslim conference because like जो आजकल भी हो रहा है, there was army bombing in the Masood and Wazir tribal areas. So, and that's one of, so people ask me, why should we read the book now? I'm like, things haven't changed that much. So the army was bombing Waziristan then, the army is bombing it now. So he asked the Muslim conference members who are part of the legislative assembly, like of India, to sort of speak up against this or to at least pass a motion, but they don't do it. So help from the Muslim political parties or Muslim politicians is not forthcoming in the way they wanted. And then he sort of meets with Gandhi and he says, okay, these, not only are they willing to help, they are also sort of showing the way of non-violence and how to go about it. And then of course, Gandhi's personal ways are also very like impressive. So you meet this barrister who is dressed in sort of the traditional dhoti, lives a very like ascetic life, wakes up at a set time, eats only this much. Even Sardar Patel, like I was reading a few weeks ago, who used to be a barrister who would dress in Western suits, he also adopted local garb once he met Gandhi and sort of said, okay, this is the way to go. So it's because of it's not because they chose Congress or Gandhi, it's vice versa. The Congress sort of took their hand and said, okay, we will help you out, while as they were rebuffed by the League. So that's where sort of the choice was made. But then he also meets with Jinnah Sahab, and they have a talk on Balochistan, and I think there's no like animosity or there's no bad air there like either. They just speak about it, and Jinnah Sahab could not speak Urdu, he could not speak English, so they had to have sort of a multilingual sort of a like interaction.
Yes.
But
they didn't have any translators there. They were still communicating.
Yeah, so he writes that my like English was good enough that I could comprehend what he's saying, and his Urdu was good enough that he could sort of get the gist of what I was saying. So that did happen. Yeah.
Right, very, very interesting. But of course, the loose coalition keh lein, strategic alliance keh lein with the Congress pre-partition, in a sense, costs Khan Shaheed and his politics in post-partition period, because he is the first one to be suspected of perhaps creating perhaps not creating but reviving the bogeyman perhaps of the Pashtunistan province. Is that correct? Is that the basis on which the new state moves against him and incarcerates him, or is it something else?
That's a good question. I think Pashtunistan really takes off in the 60s and the late sort of 50s. So right off the bat, I think the Muslim League, they wanted a one-party state. Okay, we are the Muslim League, we won Pakistan, we are going to run it now. And also there was the problem of having a constituency. So a lot of the Muslim League had come from what is now like India. So they didn't have a natural constituency within what is now Pakistan. So they also had that sort of a feeling of like insecurity. So I think the choice was made like straight up. Okay, and I don't think that had to, I think Pashtunistan and all these issues were later used as a stick to beat them with. Okay. I think one of the times, I think when like Ayub Khan's martial law, when he is sentenced, the accusation is that they found a Hindu idol on the roof like of his house, and they found a few military like helmets. And the case was made that you are a Hindu agent who wants to start some sort of a fight. So those were very. But with the Pashtunistan movement, there's also, So there is always going to be a natural like affinity. So Pashtuns here, Pashtuns there. There's always going to be, if Pakistan like accepts this and sort of like embraces this, then you can sort of work towards a mutually beneficial like interaction. If, for example, if I am from Waziristan, if I have a choice that if I want to go to university in Kabul or in Peshawar or in Lahore, if I have the choice, if I want to do my business in Kandahar or in Quetta, that then sort of solves this problem. So for example, one person who went, so many people right after Pakistan was made, they left for like Afghanistan. So you can see the difference between the colonial approach and Pakistan's approach. So the colonial approach was, let these people be. So even when our family moved, I think they wanted to buy the Kares water from us for the railway station, and the family refused to sell. And the terms was, they said, if there is war, we will use it. If there is no war, we will still pay you for it, but we won't use it. But the family said no. And this is from the archives. And in that file, they write, these are people who we know. If there is a war with Afghanistan, they are going to take up arms against us. But they didn't persecute people. One example I can give you of a person from our village, he was a notable, and when Pakistan was made, the political agent or the DC would call him in the morning and keep him waiting till nightfall. And this happened for a week, and at some point he said, I can't take this anymore. So he like crossed over. So there was also this, and even now, if Pakistan like embraces all of its nationalities, I think that's the way to go forward, because if we speak like honestly, creating Pakistan as a nation, that sort of project has failed. We haven't been able to sort of create something as a Pakistani, like, so rather than that, if we sort of see it as a bouquet of flowers where you have flowers of different colors, but it adds to the whole, if that had been the approach from the get-go, that might have proven better.
So just the last 2 minutes, because then I want to hand this over to the audience for Q&A. It's a good segue into this final question, which is coming back to a point you made earlier about the National Awaami Party, right? NAP is composed of Wali Khan, Wasbakhsh Bizenjo, Ataullah Mengal, Khair Bakhsh Mari. And so you have, Baloch nationalists come together with Pashtun nationalists to agree with General Yahya Khan during his martial law in 1970 that this will be what the new Balochistan province will look like. So they decide on the borders of what the Balochistan province today is. That decision is made in 1970. It's made prior to the general election of 1970. In the legal framework order. Uske andar, as you are reading, some letters that Khan Shaheed writes in 71 and prior to that as well, during the negotiations with Yahya Khan, there is now a sense of despondency, disappointment, despair emerging, because this is a moment where he sees that the rupture between him and the National Awaami Party is complete, what you were saying earlier. So interestingly, Abdul Ghaffar Khan in the 50s had also argued for the same internal borders for a Pashtun-centric province, right? By this time, Wali Khan, his son's ideas have changed, and he's made a coalition with the Baloch nationalists. That leaves Khan Shaheed's politics in the doldrums in the end, right? A demand that he's been making since partition, if not before
Not just him, even Bacha Khan, whole of NAP. So this was like
at that time,
like
yes.
a deal.
And then all of a sudden in 69, 70, that understanding collapses.
Yep.
Do you want to say a few words about like how that impacted him? And the last few years of his life.
So this is a great like avenue for research as well, because some of the questions have not been answered. I would differ from you slightly. So the only part of the book where I see despondency from him or a complaint from him is this one passage where he writes, "Ke I'm in prison. Pakistan has been made. I sacrificed my life for the creation like of this state. Yet I'm still like imprisoned, and I don't know why." That's the one sort of a paragraph where I see the rest. He sort of all he takes it like as it is. You mentioned the sort of the dynamic between the Baloch who were part of British Balochistan, and so in the book, if you see a picture or the thing, when he comes back from prison in 1968, Khair Bakhsh Murray drives him to his village. So he's the driver, like in his own car, he drives him to his village. But then the same Khair Bakhsh, he tells him after one unit, after the province is made, that Pashtuns in Balochistan will have to live the same way as we lived in one unit. So the dynamic has sort of like changed here. And for Bacha Khan as well, so the final sort of conversation they have is in Kabul in 1969, I think. And this is all of the NAP Central Committee is there. So Khan Shaheed asks him, our goal had always been a united Pashtun province. What is happening whenever you used to come to the province, you never went to the Baloch areas. We only used to campaign in the Pashtun areas. And the arc of this sort of is even more remarkable because Bacha Khan is someone that he was in awe of, who he revered. So if you read it, when the first time he's taken to court in the 1930s, he says, I feel proud that I'm being tried by the FCR, the same law by which Bacha Khan has been sent to prison. So to sort of see someone who you look up to and have this conversation now, we were moving towards this, but what's happening now? And the only reply he gets is that you should accept this province and we will come to help you out if you are ever suppressed. And the answer, the reply he gives is that Gandhi said the same thing to us, that you should accept Pakistan, and if you are in trouble, I will come to like help you out. And Gandhi is dead, and we are in prison most of the time. So what kind of a guarantee are you giving me? So why this happened is, I haven't. So Bacha Khan is much older as well. So I think by the 60s he's in his like 80s. So has Wali Khan taken over? Have they become tired of this constant like agitation against the state? Because, for example, in 48, 47, Bhabra happens where they're shot at. Hati Khel happens. Did they just sort of grow tired or weary of this constant like the competition with the state? I'm not sure, but there must be some archive somewhere which shows because the program always was a single Pashtun province. Even Khan Shaheed's support for the Congress party was on this once India is free, you will form linguistic provinces. So wo nahi hua, and that's the question which we asked till now. And
Thank you so much. So a round of applause for Ayaz. Thank you so much. So I'll just, over to all of you. If you'd like to ask a few questions, we have about 15 or so minutes, please. Ji, Dr.
Thank you very much. I think this was an excellent program, and I'm certainly going to read the book and also recommend it to my library. Excellent. And the question about linguistic provinces, I don't know if you have come across my book, Language and Politics in Pakistan, 1996, in which I recommend the same. After visiting these areas, talking to people, both in KP, WFP, and etc., and SIN, and so on. So I think that is something which the state doesn't want to do, although they didn't learn the lesson. In Bangladesh, they didn't learn that lesson. But yes, and India did. They created this. I mean, they have one problem, they have other problems. But this problem at least is solved, or partially solved, although there are issues even in that. But yes, I think you're right to bring it out, and it's a historical document. That's what we need to write history. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a wonderful time we have spent, a lot of knowledge we have here. My question is, Shaheed Khan spent a lot of time in prisons, even in British regimes and as well in Pakistan. Certainly there is a feudalism concept is there, and he spent a lot of time in a certain cause, noble cause. So where will line, a thin line come out with the feudalism and the noble cause and work for the people as well? So this is a great legion's property. So can you please explain on this?
In the sense that
So-
the motivation was it
Yes,
like great
from the
religion?
feudalism to the great
So,
leadership.
he was never a feudal himself, and his
Yes.
politics was all like anti-feudal. In fact, the first time he interacts with the Baloch Sardar, and he sits on a chair next to him, but his uncle, the Sardar's uncle, has sit like on the floor. He's shocked, and he says, "Okay, this is inhuman." So maybe one of the reasons why the Pashtun Baloch problem was uh, became more acute after the province was made as well was that he like advocated for the like abolishment of this whole like sort of system, and most of the people like in the assembly were sort of Sardar, so that sort of a problem was there. But yes, so he came from a very like religious household. By training, he's a mullah. He's a cleric. Bilkul, he's done all the exams. वो है, and his motivation is that. But the way he sees Islam is very different from the way the clerics then and now see it. And that's another source. And he writes in the book, the day our Maulvis lead the nation as they should according to like Islam, that day more than half of our problems will be solved. And so the converse is true as well. More than half of the problems are caused by this incorrect like application or like of
Great.
the.
So this is the reason that he was not comfortable with the Muslim League's workers in Balochistan. Perhaps he is against for because of their corrupt peoples, or they are not according to his mindset. What was the reason?
So, like as I said, the problem with the Muslim League was that the Muslim League was loyalist in its approach, while the Congress was more sort of taking on the British. And Balochistan, the colonial regime was so repressive that when they reached out for help, the Muslim League did not help, but the Congress did. So they had no choice. They had to sort of like take that. After partition, he writes as well. Okay, after partition, the Muslim League leaders, local leaders, used to badmouth him and everything because maybe they did not have popularity like with the people, so he was a source of insecurity. But he writes here that the old Muslim leaguers, like I think Maulana Johar Ali or like a few others, that the respect is still there because we know, like the people who were part of the freedom struggle before partition, we sort of still remember the hardship that we had to go through. So, for example, a Muslim League leader comes to Quetta, and I think it was Maulana Johar Ali or one of them. So the local leaders ask him not to come and visit Khan Shaheed, but he does. He says, no, this is, and he also refuses to sort of like issue any negative statement about him. So that was the reason that there was some friction.
Thank you. So nice of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayaz, for the wonderful talk. You certainly sparked my interest in the topic. I look forward to reading the book. So, imagine that Khan Shaheed was in the present day. He still have the demand of forming the Pashtun province. So, what would this Pashtun province look like today? Would it have some parts of Afghanistan? Would it have some parts of Pakistan, or would it just be a carving out of a boundary between Balochistan and KP as we know it today?
That's a very good question. So the map here, so the province is all contiguous Pashtun inhabited areas in Pakistan. So you have the province of KP, you have northern Balochistan like as it is now, and then you have like Miawali and like Hatak from the Punjab. So that was his conception like of the province. But he even goes further like in the book. So why does he want a province? So he says that the easiest way for anyone to learn is in the mother tongue. If you have a Pashtun province, you can teach in that mother tongue. in Balochistan, the problem is that if you enforce Pashto, you have the problem with the Baloch like and the Brahui. Like if you enforce Baloch or Brahui, if you enforce all three, that becomes like very expensive. So these, and like also he says okay, it's a natural affinity for people like all over the world who speak the same language, who have the same culture, to sort of want to be together. So that's what. So that's the province right there. So that's what he wanted.
If I could ask whether somebody at that time also said that, because I don't remember this, but somebody said that across the left of the river is Pashto speaking, right of the river is Hindko speaking. Aptabad, Atak, Miyawali, mostly Hindko speaking. So did someone point it out? I remember somewhere in some archive it was there, but I've forgotten.
So there the dynamic is you have, for example, you have Pashtuns who have like adopted like Hindko. So you have Jadoon, Bashwanis, Lodis, even the Yusufzai, those still speak. So it's if you say people who are Hindko by like ethnicity and not by language, I think there's still fewer than people who are Pashtuns, if that sort of makes sense to you.
Yeah, but they did demand. If you go within the Peshawar city also, Hindko wants did demand.
Could be. Could be. I think that's more of a recent. Yeah. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. First of all, I would like to thank you for educating us about this book. My question is that in that time, like Khan Abdul Samad Khan was kind of he was in favor of the females, as he dedicated this book to his wife. So I would like to ask you that from who he was inspired. Was he studying Islamic books, or he used to study what kind of books, like did he study, or did he study about any other inspirational people, like I can't I don't remember that there would be someone. I don't remember that there would be someone else who used to speak about females. The only personality we remember that is Muhammad, peace be upon him. So who was the leader that he was inspired of?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure where this came from, but like you said, the like initial schooling was all in this like Islamic books. So maybe he sort of picked this up from there. The females in the family were all also they could read and write, so maybe that sort of a like influence was there as well. But it's a good question where this comes from. I mean, so my aunt, his daughter used to bicycle to school until metric, and the school is like maybe 6 kilometers away from the village, which was like unheard of like at that time. So I look into it, but that's a good question. I'm not sure where it comes from, but like it is there.
Yeah, I'm from Chaman, Pakapon border. Yeah. Even now, if you tell someone your mother name, so it would be they would call you that you're a shameless person. So even now, it's the situation is that out, like the people they don't like to talk about their own females.
Yep.
So that time it was.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. I mean, maybe one more thing might be the area has become more conservative with time because you had the wars in Afghanistan, and so maybe that sort of influence is there like as well. But yes, he was all for female like education, female participation. No qualms there.
I think we have time for one more question. किसी और के पास अगर सवाल हो.
मैं पूछना चाहूँगा कि जो बलोच नेशनलिस्ट हैं उनका जो पे कोयटा पे किला अब्दुल्ला पे उनका क्या किस बुनियाद पर क्लेम है, उनकी क्या इंटरेस्ट है उसमें, वो क्यों क्लेम करना चाहते हैं?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I guess अगर आपके पास कोई चीज़ हो तो you don't want to give it up. अगर आपको कोई चीज़ कोई गिफ्ट में मिल जाए तो आप क्यों like उसको देंगे? आजकल so this problem used to be there, लेकिन ये 90s में हल हो गया था. मतलब मैंने किसी भी सियासी पार्टी के किसी रहनुमा से आज तक नहीं सुना कि वो, बिकॉज हमारा जो लाइन है पश्तून बलोच की, दैट्स वेरी क्लियरली डिमार्केटेड. तो जो पॉलिटिकल पार्टी से आप किसी भी बात किए तो दे से कि हाँ सिबी क्वेटा दिस इज ऑल पश्तून लाइक अफगान ऑलवेज हैज बीन. तो वो क्लेम्स लाइक अभी नहीं है. बट फॉर एग्जांपल लाइक अभी जो लाइक इस्लामाबाद में वो बलोच का फीमेल का जो प्रोटेस्ट हुआ था, so they went back to Quetta and वहाँ पे they had a huge gathering in the state stadium में. तो वहाँ पे कोई साहिब थे who I don't know कि वो कौन थे, but he seemed like a like ideologue of the movement and he made this claim कि क्वेटा इज अ बलोच शहर और ये तो जो बाकी सारे लोग हैं वो तो बाहर से आए हैं. लेकिन अगर आप वो लैंड रिकॉर्ड्स देख लें तो क्वेटा में खासी है, यासिन जई है, फाजई है, दुरानी है. सो पश्तून शहर था. इवन इफ यू टेक अप the colonial census of 1901 or something, it's 95%. So I think these are notions of the past कि वो है. आजकल मैंने नहीं सुना इस तरह का.
ठीक है जी, conclude करें unless there's one pressing question. Anything else? Okay जी, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
all of you and thank you.